Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday, many of us in the Senate had the opportunity to meet with the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States. It was an opportunity for many of us to express our admiration for the commitment of the Ukrainian people to the sovereignty of their country. They're motivated by the love of their country and a passion for freedom. Their president, President Zelensky, has shown courageous leadership. He's been inspirational as we've watched how he's put his own life at risk in order to serve his country. He's put country before personal safety. Ukraine versus Russia, good versus evil. This unprovoked attack on a peaceful, sovereign country orchestrated by Mr. Putin. We were not surprised. It was widely publicized, the use of his playbook. We knew what he was doing hour by hour in planning the invasion on Ukraine. It doesn't diminish the tragedy of Mr. Putin's actions. This is Mr. Putin's war, and he must be held fully accountable for what he has caused. I want to thank President Biden for his extraordinary global leadership on this issue. We've seen unity among our alliance, and we've seen global unity in condemning Mr. Putin's actions, which is so important in order to put the right focus on who is responsible and who can end this tragic war. We've imposed the strongest set of multilateral sanctions ever on Russia's leaders and institutions. We've cut off many of its banks from the SWIFT system of banking. We have put personal sanctions on Mr. Putin and his enablers. We've frozen assets around the world. We've isolated Russia from international organizations and events. We have restricted airspace to Russian aircraft. All that's been done not just by the United States, but in conjunction with our allies around the world. And it's having a major impact on Russia. We've seen unity in Nato. I think Mr. Putin thought that his campaign in Ukraine would weaken the NATO alliance. It's done just the opposite. It has strengthened the NATO alliance. We have sent NATO troops to the countries that border Russia that are members of NATO to make it clear that we understand our collective obligation under Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. An attack on one is an attack on all, and will come to each other's mutual defense. And we've seen many countries that have been reluctant to get involved in war-type activities change their position because they realize how clear it is what Russia is doing violates every international commitment and jeopardizes not just the integrity of Ukraine, the integrity of Europe, the integrity of sovereign states around the world. So let me just point out one of our NATO partners, Germany. Germany canceled, put on hold Nord Stream 2. We know that Mr. Putin has used energy as a weapon. He's weaponized the source of energy he has in his country. He's done that several times. Nord Stream 2 would give him additional wealth in energy, stopped by Germany. But Germany's gone further than that. For the first time now, they are going to be supplying lethal weapons to Ukraine, recognizing that all of us have a responsibility to help Ukraine in its hour of need. And yes, Germany has now made a commitment that we've asked all NATO nations to do, devote 2% of their economy to our mutual defense. And Germany's now stepping up to meet that 2% commitment. That's what we're seeing from NATO partners. Turkey is going to block the use of warships from being able to use its waters in order to get engaged in the conflict that is Russian warships. We've seen non-NATO countries step up to the plate. We're very pleased with the global response, Finland's response, Switzerland's response. Mr. President, this is unprecedented that we have this type of global unity saying to Mr. Putin, stop this invasion, an unprovoked attack on a peaceful nation. Stop it. Now, the consequences of our action have had major impact on the Russian economy. Their interest rates have gone up dramatically. The value of their currency, the ruble, has fallen dramatically. Their economy is suffering dramatically. And when the Russian people want to know who to blame as a result of their economy going into the tank, one person, the person who caused this war, Mr. Putin. The Ukrainians are defending their country and have disrupted Putin's military expectations. These are really people motivated by the right reason to defend their country. And they've been able to do amazing things in stopping the Russian advancements. That's because of their will, determination, and bravery of the Ukrainian people. But, Mr. President, they need our help. They need the help of our allies in supplying the necessary military equipment in order to defend themselves. We know how many Russian tanks are out there. We know how many Russian aircraft are out there. They need anti-tank, anti-aircraft weapons. They need ammunitions. They need a lot in order to defend themselves. And we and our allies need to step up to make sure they have what they need. They also, by the way, need humanitarian aid. We know that there's already over several 100,000 refugees that have escaped the violence in Ukraine and to neighboring countries. It's estimated that number could grow into the millions. We need to work with the international community in regards to the humanitarian needs of the refugees. But we also have to realize that Ukraine's supply chain has been totally disrupted. We need to provide humanitarian aid within Ukraine, get it to the border, and work with the Ukrainian officials so it can get inside the country. That's our responsibility in order to help in this hour of need. But we need to do even more than that. There's additional steps that we can take. We need to continue to ratchet up the sanctions that are being imposed against Mr. Putin and Russia. And as I said earlier, these sanctions are severe today, and we need to consider doing more. The administration is already setting up a process where we can trace laundered assets, so that when we say that we're going to freeze your assets of those that are being sanctioned, that we'll find those assets wherever you tried to hide them. And we're going to work with our allies around the world in order to make it clear there is no safe haven for you to hide your wealth. We need to continue to build on individual sanctions. We know that. Individual sanctions mean a great deal. There's others that need to be sanctioned. And yes, I think we need to consider the oil and gas industry as to how we can make it clear that we're not going to let Mr. Putin benefit from his assets. Trading policies need to be reevaluated. A country that invades another country without any provocation whatsoever should not be entitled to normal trade relations with the United States. And we should be looking at how we can enforce those types of changes. And yes, there needs to be personal accountability. It has now become quite obvious that Mr. Putin has had no regard whatsoever for civilian casualties. In fact, there have been reports that he may have targeted civilians in his effort to gain control of Ukraine. We need to make it clear that we will pursue, if the facts are there, potential war crimes. No one should escape accountability. We should hold those who are responsible for these tragedies accountable for it. Now, Mr. President, make it clear, as Mr. Zelensky has said, the president of Ukraine, we will always look for a diplomatic way to end this war. We want this war never to have started, and we want it to end as soon as possible. And we'll look for any way we can for a diplomatic end to this war, preserving the sovereignty of Ukraine. As we recognize that Mr. Putin's war has brought to our attention other issues that we need to really pay attention to. One is the energy policy of Europe and the United States. I've heard my colleagues talk about this, but the right answer is energy independence, investment in renewable energies and sources so that we can not only protect our national security, but we can also protect our environment. We need to make those investments moving forward so none of our allies ever have to rely upon an autocratic government's supply of oil or gas. And I want to underscore the importance that was brought to our attention yesterday. There was a parliamentarian from Ukraine that was there and said, thank you so much for the Magnitsky sanctions that you've imposed on individuals, because that really hurts. Well, we're proud because it was this body that initiated the Magnitsky sanctions. But let me remind my colleagues that our law expires at the end of this year. Now is the time to expand and extend the global Magnitsky law. We need to protect our supply chains. We saw that during the coronavirus, but we also recognize with supplies in autocratic countries, we need to shore up our own supplies and make it in America. We have legislation that's passed the House and Senate. Let's get that bill to the finish line. That would be so important for our national security. Our immediate priority, let us all stand with the people of Ukraine in their struggle for freedom. They have not only our admiration, they have our support. We want to do what we can, and we stand with the people of Ukraine. I yield the floor.